There are nights history forgets, and then there are nights history hides. December 9th, 1965 was one of them. A cold, unremarkable evening in rural Pennsylvania. The kind of night that should have dissolved quietly into memory. Yet somewhere between the fading daylight and the hum of radios tuned to static, something entered the sky. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a meteor. It was something else. Something that burned too slow, too deliberate, and fell too silently to be natural. The people of Kecksburg didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness a secret written in light. And when it touched the earth, it wouldn't just scar the woods, it would fracture the town's peace, leaving behind whispers that still linger in the trees. Before we step into that night, we must first understand the quiet world it disrupted, the calm before the fall. Before the night the sky split open, Kecksburg was a town that slept with the woods. Hidden deep in the Pennsylvania hills, it was the kind of place that rarely made the map. A cluster of weathered houses, old barns, and a church bell that rang more out of habit than faith. The days passed slowly here, carried by the rhythm of cicadas and the low hum of wind through pine. Neighbors waved from porches. Dogs slept under fences. Time didn't move. It drifted, like the creek that wound quietly behind the mill. Silence had a way of settling over Kecksburg. Heavy, but comforting. People didn't fill it with noise. They respected it. Nights were darker than city eyes could imagine. The stars so sharp they felt close enough to touch. There were no lights on the horizon, no sirens, no rush. Only the sound of the earth breathing. Soft, constant, alive. For most, this silence was safe. For others, it was a kind of lullaby that hid something ancient, waiting. The forest that surrounded Kecksburg had its own voice. Locals said the trees creaked when a storm was coming, and went still when something worse was near. Old stories whispered about lights in the hills, about footsteps where no one walked. But those were just stories, until the night one of them came true. That evening began like any other. The December cold hung low and wet, and families gathered around the warm glow of radios. Christmas was close, and the chatter of the world outside felt distant. Children played cards on wooden floors, their laughter faint beneath the static of the weather report. No one noticed how the air had changed, how it had thickened, charged like the moment before thunder. Then, somewhere between 6 and 7, someone looked up. Over the treetops, a streak of fire carved its way through the violet sky. Slow, deliberate, trailing sparks like embers from a forge. It wasn't falling fast enough to be a meteor. It moved with intention, gliding, twisting, alive. The colors shifted, orange, blue, then a strange green that seemed to hum in the air. The wind went still. Dogs began to bark. For a heartbeat, the entire town froze. Every porch light flickered as the fire cut across the horizon and disappeared behind the trees beyond Ridge Road. Then came the sound, low, metallic and distant, followed by a soft tremor that rippled beneath the ground. Some thought it was thunder. Others thought it was the end of the world. But when the silence returned, it didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like the world holding its breath, waiting for something it couldn't yet name. And in that uneasy quiet, Kecksburg, the town that never made the map, suddenly found itself marked by the sky. It began with a glow behind the trees. Faint at first, like the reflection of lightning that never came. Then the ground shook again, a deep, short tremor that rattled dishes and sent dogs howling. By the time the noise faded, the people of Kecksburg were standing in their doorways, staring at the dark line of forest beyond their fields. Somewhere in there, something had fallen. Bill Weaver was one of the first to grab his coat. He lived less than a mile from where the streak vanished. With a flashlight and his brother behind him, he followed the faint smell of smoke drifting from the trees. But this wasn't wood smoke. It was sharper, metallic, almost electric. Like the air after lightning, but thicker, heavier. Each step into the woods brought silence. The insects had stopped. The wind was gone. Even their own breathing sounded wrong, as if the air itself didn't want to carry sound anymore. The beam of the flashlight wavered across branches that looked scorched, blackened at the edges. Sap hissed where the bark still smoked. Then the ground dipped. And there, in a shallow ravine, lay something that didn't belong to this world. It was shaped like an acorn, smooth and metallic, maybe 12 feet across, half buried in the mud. No windows, no seams, just a solid body of dull bronze metal, its surface faintly glowing blue-green, the same hue that had streaked across the sky. Strange markings ran along its sides, symbols no one recognized, raised slightly, catching the light like veins. And from within it came a sound, low, constant, almost mechanical, yet not entirely. It wasn't a hum so much as a vibration you could feel in your chest. Bill whispered that it was some kind of spacecraft. Maybe Russian, maybe military. His brother didn't answer. He was staring at the ground. The soil beneath the thing wasn't scorched. It was glassy, fused like melted sand. The air shimmered, distorting the trees behind it. And then they saw it. The faint pulse of light traveling along its surface, rhythmic, alive. They stood frozen. No one dared get closer. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity rooted them in place. The hum deepened, vibrating through their bones. For a moment, it almost sounded like breathing. Then a flash, just a flicker, and the light went out. The hum stopped. The forest exhaled. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked. That was enough. The brothers turned and stumbled back toward town, the beam of their flashlight jerking wildly through the fog. Behind them, the silence returned, thick and waiting. By the time they reached the road, others had gathered. Men with lanterns, women wrapped in coats, children whispering questions no one could answer. Some said they saw soldiers already heading down the dirt path. Others swore they heard trucks before the crash even happened. Bill tried to explain what he'd seen, but the words didn't sound real. Even to him, he kept repeating the same thing. It was glowing. It was breathing. No one laughed. No one spoke. They just listened to the sound that began to rise again. Distant engines getting closer. Headlights swept across the trees, cutting through the mist. Uniformed men stepped out, faces hidden in the glare. One of them lifted a hand and told everyone to go home. "Nothing to see here," he said, calm but cold. And just like that, the woods that had swallowed something from the sky were swallowed in silence again. Only this time, it wasn't natural. It was enforced. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, Kecksburg was no longer just a quiet town. It was occupied. Trucks rolled in before most people even finished their first cup of coffee. Olive green, unmarked, their tires grinding the frozen dirt into the shape of secrets. Men in uniforms stepped out, not the local National Guard, but strangers. Their faces were unreadable, movements precise, voices clipped and cold. They didn't ask questions. They gave instructions. Residents were told to stay indoors. Roads leading into the woods were blocked by sawhorses and floodlights. The radio station in Greensburg stopped mentioning the fireball. and the few reporters who tried to drive in that morning were quietly turned around by men who didn't identify themselves. Something heavy hung in the air. Not smoke, not fog, but silence, thick and purposeful. Witnesses who had gone into the woods the night before were approached one by one. A man in a dark coat, not military but official in a different way, asked calm questions that felt rehearsed. Names were written down. Statements were corrected. One by one, stories began to blur. Bill Weaver said the man who visited him smiled the whole time. The kind of smile that hides a threat behind politeness. That afternoon, the hum returned. Low, mechanical, steady. Then came the sound of chains. People watched from behind curtains as soldiers carried equipment into the forest. Crates, cables, something that looked like a containment tent. No one dared ask why. They only listened. Somewhere in that maze of trees, metal was being dragged across the ground. Then, around noon, the trucks came back. One of them was different, a flatbed. It moved slower, escorted by jeeps. On it, beneath a dark tarp, was a shape that curved like a bell. Too wide at the base, too narrow at the top. It was heavy enough to bend the truck's suspension. As it passed through town, everyone stopped moving. The only sound was the engine. For a brief second, the tarp shifted, and something beneath it glowed faintly blue. Then it was gone, out of Kecksburg, swallowed by the winding road toward Pittsburgh. After that, the cleanup began. Soldiers moved like ghosts, erasing every sign of what had happened. Trees were cut, soil was taken. Locals who wandered too close were escorted away, told that a weather satellite had fallen and that radiation checks were being done for their safety. The word radiation froze people into obedience. By nightfall, the men were gone. The barricades disappeared. All that remained was a flattened stretch of earth in the woods, and the faint metallic taste in the air that no one could explain. But the silence didn't end there. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Phones clicked when lifted. Letters went missing. A few witnesses claimed that government cars idled near their homes at night, headlights off. When they looked out, the cars would slowly pull away. Whatever fell in those woods, the truth of it didn't leave with the truck. It lingered, in whispers, in unease, in the way people avoided talking about that night. And even now, when the story is told, it ends the same way every time. What they saw was never meant to be spoken of again. By the next morning, calm had been restored, at least on paper. The radio carried the official statement. What people saw streaking over Pennsylvania was nothing unusual. Just a meteor burning up in the atmosphere. No object had crashed. No debris was found. Everything was explained, neatly folded into science and certainty. The newspapers followed suit. Fireball over Kecksburg. No cause for alarm. The headlines read. The articles quoted military officials who assured readers that nothing had been recovered, that rumors of trucks and soldiers were exaggerated. The language was precise, sterile, the kind designed to smother curiosity. And for most of the world, that was enough. The story vanished as quickly as it had appeared. But in Kecksburg, the silence spoke differently. People remembered the Geiger counters clicking in the dark, the men in protective suits combing the woods, the strange circular patch of scorched earth that appeared overnight. One farmer swore he'd seen soldiers digging something up, and another found tire tracks that led nowhere, ending abruptly in the middle of a frozen field. Police reports from that night were suddenly misplaced. Witness testimonies disappeared. Photos taken by locals never came back from the developers. When a journalist from Pittsburgh requested access to military logs, entire pages were blacked out. The reason given: national security. What unsettled the town wasn't the idea of a cover-up. It was the precision of it. Every trace of the event had been smoothed over, polished until nothing remained but uncertainty. Those who spoke too loudly found their words twisted, their credibility quietly undone. And yet, despite the weight of denial, something in the air still felt charged, as though the forest itself remembered what the official record had erased. For decades, the meteor story remained the accepted truth. A perfect, plausible answer for those who didn't look too closely. But the locals never stopped feeling that hum beneath the calm. That sense that something had been buried deeper than any report could reach. Because if it was just a meteor, why did men in hazmat suits guard it? Why were witnesses silenced? And why, after all these years, does the silence still cost so much? Time has a way of softening most memories, but not this one. In Kecksburg, the story never truly died. It just went quiet, tucked into the pauses of conversations, whispered in low tones at the edge of family gatherings. The people who were there grew older. Their hair turned grey, their hands shook a little more each winter. But when they spoke of that night, their voices steadied, as if they were holding something too important to fade with them. "There wasn't a meteor," one old man said, his eyes lost in the distance. "It was humming. You could feel it in your ribs like it was breathing." Another recalled the air, how it smelled of copper and ozone. "I remember my radio went dead," she said softly. "Just hissed. Then the dogs, they wouldn't go near the woods for days." Their words come like echoes through static, fragmented, half-believed even by themselves. Decades of being told it was all imagination had worn them down. "They told us not to talk," one witness murmured. "Said it was for our safety. But you don't forget something like that. You don't forget that sound." Some of them still have old notebooks, shaky handwriting describing symbols etched into the metal, or sketches of a bell-shaped craft scrawled in pencil before fear convinced them to burn the pages. Others kept quiet for years, afraid of ridicule or of the men who once knocked on their doors. "I know what I saw," an elderly woman said, "and I know what they took." There's a strange peace in their retelling, not the peace of closure, but the kind that comes from finally releasing something heavy. As they speak, their eyes drift toward the forest, the same one that's regrown over the site. Thicker now, almost protective. Some say, on still nights, you can still hear that hum under the soil if you listen close enough. It wasn't until the late 90s that the silence began to crack again. Younger researchers, UFO investigators, local historians, even a few curious journalists started digging through archives, pulling at the loose threads left behind. They found old police logs with missing lines, government memos stamped classified, and audio interviews that had been erased halfway through. Every discovery deepened the mystery instead of solving it. The locals watched with quiet amusement. They'd been waiting for this, for someone to care again. "They think they're finding new clues," one old man said, smiling faintly. "But that ground remembers more than they do." And maybe he was right. When one research team ventured back into the woods with metal detectors, they claimed the readings went wild in a perfect circle, right where the soil looked unnaturally smooth. Some said their batteries drained instantly. Others swore they felt vibrations through their boots. Faint, rhythmic, like the echo of a heartbeat deep underground. The old witnesses never joined them. They'd done their part. They'd spoken their truth at last. For them, the mystery wasn't in proving what fell that night, but in understanding why they were made to forget. Because after 40 years of silence, the story didn't fade. It resurfaced, reshaped, and retold. And beneath the new voices, beneath the documentaries and radio shows, the original hum still lingers. Low, steady, patient, waiting for the next set of ears to listen. And as the last of those who remembered pass on, the woods remain, quiet, unchanged, holding the memory no one could erase. The forest around Kecksburg doesn't give up its secrets easily. By the time the modern investigators arrived, armed with GPS units, ground-penetrating radar, and digital maps marked with witness coordinates, the land had long since healed, or at least it pretended to. To the untrained eye, the crash site was just another patch of Pennsylvania woods. Moss-covered trunks, a narrow creek, the distant buzz of insects. But to those who came looking, there was something off. Their compasses spun without reason. Phones lost signal even under clear skies. One researcher, a geologist named Sarah Nolan, noted that her instruments read subtle electromagnetic interference, faint but persistent, like an invisible hum echoing through the ground. It's almost as if the soil itself doesn't want to be measured, she said, half joking, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. They followed the maps compiled from decades of old testimonies, coordinates marked by aging witnesses who had described landmarks that no longer existed. A split oak, a burned fence post, a ridge that erosion had swallowed. Each step seemed to take them both closer and farther from where the truth might lie. The deeper they walked, the quieter the forest became. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to thin out, leaving only the crunch of boots and the faint static in their recording mics. At one point, a cameraman paused to change his battery, only to find it drained completely, inexplicably. The spare he carried was dead too. When they checked the footage later, the moment they crossed a certain unseen line, the video glitched into streaks of color and silence, like the forest blinked, one of them said. By afternoon, the group found what they were looking for, or what was left of it, a circular clearing, almost perfect in shape, where the trees refused to grow straight. The soil there was different, darker, denser, with streaks of glass fused beneath the surface. They dug carefully, scraping back roots that had wound themselves over something metallic. It took hours before the first piece was visible, a curved fragment, dull bronze under decades of dirt, still bearing faint geometric ridges. It looked like nothing from nature. Too symmetrical, too deliberate. When Sarah brushed it clean, her hand trembled. The metal felt warm despite the winter chill. Could be an old piece of farm equipment, one of them muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The air had changed again. Heavier now, thick with the same metallic tang survivors once described. They photographed the site, took soil samples, and recorded notes, but none of them spoke much as the light began to fade. There was a sense, unspoken yet unanimous, that they were standing somewhere not entirely normal. Even the forest seemed to watch, its shadows gathering a little closer as the sun dipped low. When they finally packed up to leave, Sarah glanced back one last time. The clearing seemed smaller, as if the trees were closing in to hide it again. She thought she saw the ground shimmer faintly, as though something beneath it was shifting, adjusting, remembering. Later, when the samples were analyzed, they showed traces of compounds that didn't match the local geology. The metal fragment too defied easy classification. Nothing conclusive, nothing certain. but one of the researchers summed it up best in her report. It's as if the land has learned to bury what it doesn't want us to find. And beneath the roots of Kecksburg's forest, something unseen continued to hum, slow, steady, patient, as if the ground itself still remembered what fell from the sky. The fragments began appearing quietly, like whispers resurfacing after years underwater. Small metallic pieces, each no larger than a hand, began circulating among collectors and researchers, all allegedly traced back to the same place, Kecksburg. They were passed through private hands, traded at conventions, mailed anonymously in padded envelopes marked only with the word sample. Most were dismissed as hoaxes, but a few, when tested, refused to fit into any known category. On the surface, they looked unremarkable, tarnished, dull, almost like brass. Yet under spectroscopy, the alloy told a different story. The ratio of elements didn't match anything produced by standard Earth manufacturing. One metallurgist described it as familiar, but wrong, like hearing your own language spoken with an accent no human could make. Another reported that when heated, the metal didn't expand as expected. It contracted, as though resisting examination. The findings were never made public. Most of the labs that examined the fragments received quiet visits from men in suits who offered no identification but carried letters stamped with federal seals. Equipment was confiscated, results erased. One researcher in Ohio claimed the sample she'd been given simply vanished overnight. Her locks untouched, her filing cabinet empty. "It's not the first time we've had visitors," she told a colleague, half smiling, half afraid. Then there was the rumor of the box. Supposedly stored deep within a restricted Pennsylvania facility, it was said to contain the largest remaining piece of the Kecksburg object, retrieved before the site was cleared. Some who claimed to have seen it described it as a section of curved metal, engraved with symbols like flowing letters or circuitry. Others said it wasn't metal at all, but something that changed texture when touched, smooth one moment, coarse the next, like it was deciding how to appear. Officially, the object never existed, but the secrecy surrounding it felt too organized, too deliberate for a simple myth. Declassified documents from the early Cold War hinted at experimental aerospace materials, recovered objects that didn't fit conventional design. Projects with names like Operation Moondust and Blue Fly were quietly referenced, both involving retrieval of unknown debris. Still, the question lingers. Was Kecksburg part of these programs, or something even deeper? The tone of those who dare speak of it remains hushed, reverent. They talk as if describing a relic, not a machine, something discovered, not built. And though scientists and skeptics dismiss the legend, the sense of unease never quite leaves the room when the topic surfaces. The idea that somewhere, locked away in a steel vault beneath Pennsylvania soil, an artifact sits humming, patient, silent, enduring, waiting for the day when humanity learns how to look at it without fear. Because some truths aren't denied by ignorance, they're protected by silence, and the Kecksburg box remains exactly where it was meant to be, unseen yet never forgotten. Patterns have a way of whispering where facts cannot, and when researchers began comparing the Kecksburg incident to other unexplained events, something unsettling emerged, a repetition that crossed borders, languages, and decades. In 1942, during the chaos of World War II, Allied pilots over the Rhine reported glowing acorn-shaped objects pacing their bombers. They called them Foo Fighters, dismissing them as German experiments. Yet when German pilots described the same shapes following their own aircraft, the explanation collapsed. The official reports were filed away, sealed, and forgotten. 2 decades later, a similar description surfaced in Mexico. Villagers claimed a bronze, bell-like craft had descended silently into a ravine, radiating a faint hum that sent birds scattering for miles. The military arrived within hours. By sunrise, the ravine was empty, and so were the villagers' memories. They remembered only the sound, like metal breathing. In 1978, a Soviet forestry team in the Ural Mountains stumbled upon scorched ground and fragments etched with the same looping inscriptions once described in Kecksburg. Their notes vanished from archives after the fall of the USSR, but a surviving page, smuggled out years later, carried a single handwritten phrase in Russian. It moves, even when buried. Across the world, stories echoed with eerie precision. South Africa, 1981. A farmer finds a metallic sphere half embedded in the veldt, emitting a pulsing vibration. Canada, 1992. Hunters encounter a dull bronze seed in the forest that vanishes when they return the next day. Chile, 2004. Miners hear a deep hum from beneath the desert floor. Seismic sensors register rhythmic waves rather than tremors. Each time the description is the same: smooth, metallic, acorn-shaped, alive. It's easy, of course, to dismiss them, to file these accounts under imagination, hysteria, or myth. But patterns have gravity. They pull on the threads of disbelief until something gives way. When laid side by side, these incidents seem less like isolated mysteries and more like fragments of a single hidden story, a presence that drifts between moments in history, appearing long enough to be seen, but never long enough to be understood. Some investigators argue that these aren't aliens at all, but remnants of something human, secret experiments that spiraled beyond control during the Cold War. The theory suggests that early aerospace projects may have stumbled upon technologies that couldn't be contained, mechanisms that reacted instead of obeyed. Others insist that's only wishful thinking, an attempt to place the unexplainable within the bounds of human failure, rather than cosmic design. And then there are those who speak softly, almost reverently, of a deeper possibility: that these acorns were never meant to be seen by us at all, that they move through time the way we move through distance, slipping between eras like travelers between rooms, leaving behind the faintest trace of their passage. No proof, no wreckage, just the pattern. Every few decades it resurfaces, a hum in the soil, a glint of metal under roots, a shape glimpsed against the dusk sky. Always familiar, always denied, always erased. The reports vanish, the witnesses age, the world forgets, until it happens again. And somewhere beneath the weight of all those buried accounts, the word pattern lingers like an echo, calm, deliberate, unending. Perhaps the truth of Kecksburg was never meant to be isolated. Perhaps it was a chapter in a story far older and far quieter than we can imagine. Because maybe the universe doesn't repeat itself by accident. Maybe it remembers. And maybe some truths are meant to stay buried, because the ground itself still listens. The woods of Kecksburg have grown back now, thicker, older, and quieter than before. The paths that once led to the clearing are overgrown, hidden beneath blankets of moss and decades of fallen leaves. The town has changed too. New houses stand where old ones once leaned, and the people who lived through that night have mostly faded into photographs. But when the wind moves just right through the trees, it carries a sound, faint, low, almost familiar. Some say it's the creek, others aren't so sure. If you walk deep enough into the forest, the air shifts. It grows still, heavy, as though the world itself is holding its breath. The soil feels strange beneath your feet, softer in certain places, as if something sleeps below. You can almost sense it, not watching but waiting. The birds avoid that patch. Animals circle it but never cross. And on the coldest nights, the fog seems to rise only there, curling like breath from something alive. No one knows what truly fell in Kecksburg. A machine, perhaps, or a message written in metal and light. Some believe it was never meant to be found, that the crash was not an accident, but a test, to see how humanity reacts when the unknown touches its doorstep. Others whisper that it wasn't from beyond the stars at all, but from beneath our own history, a mirror reflecting everything we refuse to understand about ourselves. The official story remains untouched. The forest, however, remembers. Every broken branch, every scar in the earth has healed. But beneath that calm surface, something hums softly, like a memory looping through time. It doesn't demand to be believed. It simply exists. The locals don't talk about it much anymore. But sometimes, on long drives at dusk, someone glances toward the tree line and lowers their voice, as if the story might still be listening. The children who once heard their grandparents' tales now tell them again, each version quieter than the last, like a candle burning itself to its final flicker. And maybe that's how it's meant to be. Not every secret wants to be uncovered. Some prefer the company of soil and silence, because truth, like the forest, can grow wild when left alone, its roots reaching into places no one dares to dig. So if you ever find yourself in Kecksburg, standing at the edge of those woods, listen. Let the quiet sink in until it feels alive. Somewhere beneath that hush, the story still stirs. Not gone, just waiting. Sometimes the forest keeps its secrets, because it remembers who tried to take them.